Cultural Arts Director at the JCC in Buffalo, New York. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon in what promises to be a deliciously fun event. Today's event is part of the Buffalo International Jewish Film Festival, which is virtually running through August 21st. And specifically, today's event is in conjunction with the film Challah Rising in the Desert, The Jews of New Mexico, which was generously sponsored by Mark Goldman. Joining me today are Avital Ben-Dwar from Israel and our guest chef Marshall Goldstein from Toledo, Ohio, who will be sharing what his friends and family call a piece of heaven, which is his traditional braided challah. Avital is the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Western Galilee Partnership Together program, which is a partnering presenter of today's event. In just a moment, I'll be inviting Avital to share and tell us a little bit about that program, as well as further introduce Chef Marshall. I just want to remind you all that feel free to please send comments and questions throughout the demonstration via the live chat option, and Chef Marshall will do his best to kind of answer as we go along. Just a reminder that there is a 30-second delay, so he might be doing something and your questions might come in a little bit following, so just please take that into consideration. And again, I want to invite Avital, thank you again for this wonderful opportunity to join us this afternoon. And if you can just give us a little bit more information about the partnership program that helped bring all of us together today. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. First of all, I want to thank you for everything you're doing for this film festival and for collaborating with our partnership. It's really, really great, and we're very excited about it. So I'm Avital. I work in the Jewish Agency in a program called Partnership Together. Partnership connects between Jewish communities in the US and all over the world with different places in Israel. We have 46 different partnerships. One of the partnership and the best partnership is the Western Galilee Partnership, which connects between the city of Akko and Mate Asher, and 16 communities in the US, one of them is Buffalo, and Budapest, Hungary. This is us. We're doing many, many programs, social programs, medical programs, educational programs, and we connect hundreds of people through these programs, and we engage volunteers, and we do many, many connections. A very good example for this connection is Chef Marshall, who actually participated in one of our programs in an educators delegation last year, I think it was. And he came to the Western Galilee. He connected with other teachers from other places in the US and from the Western Galilee and Budapest. I think he's still in contact with some of them. And he also inspired us using cooking and baking as an educational tool and for connections. So now I'm going to introduce Chef Marshall to you before he will make his challah. Chef Marshall has an associate degree from Johnson & Wales University in Charleston, South Carolina, and a Bachelor of Art degree from the Lourdes University in Sylvania, Ohio. He was featured on a local food show in the Toledo area called Let's Eat Toledo and has been written up in multiple newspapers. He has worked the last 14 years as an award-winning executive chef in the healthcare industry. Chef Marshall has been devoted to sharing his belief of Tikkun Olam, and for the last 27 years has been the kosher cooking instructor at his congregation Temple Shomer Emunim in Sylvania, Ohio, and has taught all grades in the temple religious Sunday school, teaching about food and relation to holiday, as well as all Jewish life cycle events. Well, looking forward, learning how to make your traditional challah, braided challah. I'm very, I love bread. So thank you again for doing this, Chef Marshall, and enjoy, everyone.
Thank you very much, Avital. I'd like to be able to personally thank Katie, Avital, and Patricia Quinn of the Jewish Community Center of Greater Buffalo and the Partnership Together program for having me this afternoon. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get things set up so we can go ahead and make challah. The recipe was attached with the instructions for the documentary. And so I believe, and this virtual demonstration. So I think everybody should be able to go ahead and follow along. And of course, if anybody has questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. As Katie said before, there's a 30-second delay. So please realize I might be looking a little bit into the camera to see what questions I can answer as best as I possibly can. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get right into making the challah. Over here, I have all of my ingredients. We have 2 ounces of yeast. We have a cup and 1 teaspoon of sugar, 12 cups of flour, 4 eggs, a tablespoon of salt, a teaspoon of half teaspoon, I'm sorry, of baking powder, a 1/4 cup of honey. And of course, we're also going to go ahead and turn on some water because we're going to need some warm water to help activate the yeast. And we're going to go ahead and get started. You want to go ahead? Now, I will tell everybody, when I first made this dough, this recipe, I started making this recipe about 26 years ago in my first or second year of actually being a cooking instructor at the temple. Because the teacher that had preceded me, that's pretty much all they taught. And when I looked at the original recipe, it wasn't exactly what I thought it should be. It was extremely, extremely heavy, something that I thought could be improved upon. So what I do is I take, in some cases, many people will realize that they don't have a KitchenAid mixer or a mixer that's large enough. And believe it or not, you could actually make this dough right on the counter without a mixer. You would just use your flour and dig a hole in the center and then put everything into it and slowly, gradually add it together. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the yeast. One teaspoon of sugar. And then about a half a cup of water. And we want it to be warm, not really hot. The idea is that we want to activate the yeast. And what most people don't realize is that you're going to want, before I go on, we want two cups to add to the yeast after it starts to evolve a little bit. What most people don't realize is yeast actually is like a pathogen, a bacteria, and it lives off of time, temperature, and moisture. So what we want to do is we want to keep the yeast at a certain temperature. Most yeast is best stored in the refrigerator, especially when it's open. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mix the yeast up with the water and the sugar just a little bit. Give it an opportunity for a few minutes. We want it to go ahead and bubble. If you could, in a few minutes, you'll be able to see. It starts to bubble because that means that it's actually feeding off the sugar and the warm water is actually activating it. So that you get a better opportunity to see what I'm talking about. You'll start to see how it's bubbling inside. And then after that, you basically want to go ahead and let it bubble to a certain extent. In the meantime, what you can do is you can go ahead and take your 4 eggs. I suggest taking your eggs out and letting them sit at room temperature. This helps as it helps blend with the flour and all of the liquid ingredients. So we're going to take 4 eggs. I'm going to go ahead and break them into a separate bowl. Now, once that happens, pretty much by now, you'll notice if you look into the bowl again, you'll see that it's bubbled up quite a bit more. So you only really want to go ahead and let it sit for a few minutes to let it bubble. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're going to add the rest of the sugar, 1 full cup, all 4 eggs, a cup of oil, honey, again, a 1/4 cup of honey. We want to add all the liquid ingredients first so that it has a way to blend them together and make it a little bit more smooth. Vanilla, and the rest of the water. Then what I do is I go ahead and blend it together. We want to make sure that we give the yeast and the eggs an opportunity to blend together so it's a more smooth consistency. We want to use a dough hook while we're doing this, not a paddle or a whisk. A dough hook is prominent because it's going to be a heavy dough, but once we start to let it rise, it'll rise really, really well. And it becomes more light and fluffy. Once we have it blended fairly well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start to add our dry ingredients. 12 cups of flour. It's a lot of flour. So we're going to add a little bit at a time. And you might want to be careful of your surroundings, just to know where you're at.
So a question came through. Why do you use vanilla?
A vanilla extract, it's adding a little bit of flavor to the dough itself. The dough itself combines really, really well with the honey flavor. It's really sweet, but the vanilla gives it a nice blend, kind of like a custard-like flavor. That's 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're going to start out, like I said, we start out small and we'll work our way up. And we're going to go ahead and blend the dough together, the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients. And I suggest you start out on first speed and then kind of work it into second speed. And if you'll notice, you'll see that the dough is starting to blend really well together. And you're going to want to keep a spatula around with you. And make sure that if you have to go ahead, stop the mixer and go ahead and get the flour off the sides. Doesn't hurt to scrape down a little bit because you're going to want to make sure that the dough on the bottom is mixed very well with the flour on the top. Otherwise, towards the end, you'll notice that the flour itself is actually stuck to the bottom. Now, we're going to go ahead and add our salt. And we're going to add our baking powder because now we have it at a consistency where we can add those and they're not just floating. If you add the salt and the baking powder with the first liquid ingredients before you add some of the flour, it's going to clump up. So you want to make sure that you add some of the flour first. And we're going to blend it together. So we get the salt and the baking powder in the middle of the dough. We're going to go ahead and scrape the bowl again. And then we're going to add the rest of the flour. Now, this is a little tricky because if you're working with a smaller KitchenAid, even like the one that I have here, the bowl gets full relatively quickly. And you say to yourself, oh my God, that's a lot of flour we're putting into this recipe. It is, but in the end, you're going to see a wonderful, wonderful result. You're going to see a wonderful challah. We're going to go ahead and start this out slow, get it mixed in a little bit more. Adding the flour a few cups at a time helps so that it binds into the rest of the liquid ingredients, and it's less of a mess on your counter, for sure. And if you're lucky enough, you can have a cover that you can put on to your KitchenAid, and you can increase the speed a little bit so that helps blend the flour in a little bit more. And then we can take that off. And as you'll see, it's really starting to come together. This is where you want to go ahead at this point in time, is to go ahead and add the rest of the flour in. Scrape down the paddle, the hook, sorry. And I like to kind of just swirl around the outside of the bowl, just to kind of sink the flour on the inside. Most of the flour in any mixing bowl goes to the outside, not the center. We'll put our cap on again. And we'll go ahead and start on slow. You're going to want to mix it at a low speed, because if you mix it at too high of a speed, one of the things that can happen is you can overdevelop the gluten inside the dough. And basically, when you overdevelop the gluten inside the dough, what's going to end up happening is it detours the dough from actually rising as well as it should. Then we get it to a certain point, and we want to go ahead and take the dough out of the bowl. And what I like to do is I like to go ahead and sprinkle just a little bit of flour. You want to have a nice area to be able to go ahead and roll your dough out. You're going to knead it first. And so you're going to want to have a nice area. And one of the things I told you before is you'll notice if you don't scrape the bowl down at the very end, it becomes very sticky and sticks to the bottom of the bowl, which you don't want. We're going to go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of flour over the top. And then we're going to start kneading the dough. If you'll notice it sticks to the counter, then what we want to do is sprinkle a little more flour down. That's all. We don't want to put too much flour down because we don't want to dry the dough out, but we also don't want it to stick to the counter. So you're going to knead the dough for roughly probably 5 to 10 minutes. It's a little bit of a work. Some people will tell me, hey, you know, that's why I get the mixer. But I don't think any mixer really honestly kneads the dough as well as doing it the old-fashioned way.
I have questions for you. So can you cut the recipe by half if you want to make fewer challahs?
Absolutely. So this recipe makes 3 wonderful, nice size challahs, which I'll show you at the very end, the actual size of a 3 challah batch. I typically like to tell people to cut it in half to begin with, because number one, not a lot of people are going to eat 3 challahs. Number 2, it helps with your KitchenAid at home. I hope that helps.
The next question is salt necessary? Because some people are on a low salt diet.
So we could probably use less salt than a tablespoon. To be honest with you, I would have to break this down. I actually have the recipe broken down in terms of nutrition. If you want, you can get in touch with me, and I'd be more than happy to share you the nutritional information on the recipe. But I believe that it's pretty much a low sodium recipe to begin with. It only requires 1 tablespoon per 12 cups of the flour.
And the next question is it okay to sift salt and baking powder into flour?
Absolutely. I don't think the salt will clump up in the sifter. A lot of people prefer to sift the flour, which is typically what I do well before I get started. The flour itself might look a little clumpy, but it is a sifted flour, except for this little bit right here, just to have to roll out the dough. So once we get the dough, so to answer the question, yes, you can actually sift the salt with the baking powder. It won't hurt it one bit. In fact, if it makes you feel any better, I would add a little bit of flour in with it as you're sifting the salt and baking powder together. Add some flour with it and sift it through, because it'll sift easier through the sifter. So now we have this nice, I like to roll it into a nice little log. And then I try to figure out how to cut it into equal parts, thirds, if you will. You can match it up this way. It works out really, really well. You might get one piece that's bigger than the other. And then I go ahead and I put these off to rest. Now, this is the process of actually braiding the challah. When we get to this point, most people like to let their dough rise. You can do that. You can let it rise, and I believe even in my instructions it says to let it rise for an hour. The dough becomes more pliable. It becomes a little bit lighter, a lot fluffier. If some people are in a hurry and they don't have a lot of time, I would say go ahead, get your dough together. It's going to be nice. A very pliable dough, as you can see, pliable, very elastic, which is what we really want. So then we're going to take that dough and we're going to cut it into thirds. I'm going to show you two different kinds of braids today. One is a 3 braid and one is going to be a 5 braid. In our documentary, Challah Rising in the Desert, their community is very well known for a 5 braided challah. So we're going to take each piece and we're going to roll it out, and we're going to knead it just a little bit, because again, we don't want to overdevelop the glutens. And we don't, at this point, we don't really need a lot of flour on the counter. We don't want the dough to stick, but we don't want too much flour on it because it'll dry the dough out. Now you can either roll this really, really long, just like this, because you have plenty of dough and it's a very elastic dough. God gave us these wonderful tools. They do so much. And continue and go ahead and roll out 3 separate pieces. Again, a little bit of kneading, but not a lot. And we pretty much want to be very symmetrical all the way through the entire rope. Okay, so we have 3 pieces. Now, there are so many different ways to braid challah. The way that I like to do it is a way that I've pretty much been doing for the last 27 years since I first started. I make a teepee at the top. It's very simple. You take the right, and you cross over the center. You take the left and you cross over that. So you have like a teepee top. Now, the way I get started is very simple. I take the center piece, I lift it up, and I scooch the right piece under, and the center piece goes over the top of that. The right piece is now the center piece. I take that piece, now the center piece, and I scooch the left piece over. So now the left piece is now the center. And then I just follow the same pattern. Right under, left under, right under, left under, till I get to the end. And then I pinch it together just like this. And I go ahead and tuck it up underneath using my finger and put it right underneath the dough. It's going to stay there. Now I have the beginning braid of my dough. For years, I was always figuring out what to do next, because which piece goes where? Does this piece go here? It didn't make sense. So I started thinking to myself, well, how do I do this? Well, the best way I came up with was to go ahead and do basically the opposite from this end. Pull the center piece up, move the left piece over, and that becomes the center piece, and then do the same. So we're doing the same all over again. and I want it to be as tight as possible. The dough here as tight as possible, so not many crevices, going all the way down to the very end. And then I go ahead and I pinch that end again, pull it down and tuck it up and put it underneath, just like that, as we did before. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take that and put it on some parchment paper. And we're going to let that rise. Okay, stay there. Now, what I'd like to do is go ahead and show you a 5 braid. A 5 braid is fairly popular for a lot of different reasons. Okay, we're going to take 5 ropes of equal length. Just like so. And if you're not careful, you'll notice that not every one of them is perfectly shaped the same. That happens sometimes. So what you want to do from here is you want to go ahead and pinch the tops together. Very, very simple. Very, very simple, okay? We're going to pinch all the tops together. We're going to separate 2 on this side and 3 on this side. Very, very simple. Just like that. Okay. Now this is a very simple braid. We're going to take the outer of the 3 and bring it to the center over here. And then we're going to do the same over here. The outer of the 3 to the center, 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 to the center, to the center, the outer of the 3 to the center, until we go all the way down.
So if you wanted to add raisins, when would you do that in the recipe?
Okay, so typically what I like to do when I do like to add raisins, it's an option on my recipe. You might have noticed in the bottom. I like to take my dough at the very end before I start to knead it on the counter, and I separate it. If I want raisins in the dough, not everybody likes raisins like me. And there are many other different things you can put in your challah. In the documentary, they talk about a jalapeno challah that they make. I would do jalapeno and cheese because I just love the flavors. They mold together. Maybe an Asiago cheese would be really, really wonderful. And then in the end, when you go to bake it, maybe throw a little bit of the Asiago on top of the cheese so it melts in and becomes crusty. But the time to add that would be when you get the dough out and you're kneading it. You want to separate a certain amount of the dough, add your raisins, and knead those into the dough at that time before you start to let it rise or roll. And as you can see, a lot of people like this. I never realized in all the years of teaching that this is actually a very easy braid, especially for kids, because the kids don't have a large retention span. So what I do is I get it to the end. I continue to go as far as I can. And then once I get it to that certain point, I go ahead and pinch the ends together. And again, pull it under and tuck it up. Now, most people and all the things that I saw on the video was to go ahead, and most of what they do is they chop off the end piece of this, which I felt really, really bad about, because we don't chop off anything. We don't waste anything in our lives that I know of. So I just rebraid it. Find a way to rebraid it and incorporate the end. It might look a little unusual, but you pinch it and push it under just like that. And there you have a 5 braid. Then what we do is we go ahead and we set that right on the stove, on the pan, on the stove. And you want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees so that you have an opportunity for the heat to rise right up in here. And it's beautiful because the fact is the heat coming from this back area will help make the dough rise. Once the dough's risen for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to go ahead and we want to take some egg wash. I use 2 eggs to about a half a cup of water, and I mix it up real nicely. Again, God's given tools. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and you're going to wash it on the dough. I would say to cover the dough, I make sure that I cover the entire dough, and then I do it a second time. It really, really is wonderful. We want to bake it for about 30 to 35 minutes. We want to take a look and see if you can lift it and it feels light and you tap on it and sounds hollow, it's definitely done. If you bake it for longer than 40 minutes, it's going to overcook, and the bread itself is not going to be as soft on the inside. It's going to be real crunchy. The bottom of the dough is going to be really, really well done. That being said, once you put it into the oven, you can go ahead and bake it for that 35 to 40 minutes. And this is the end result of a beautiful, beautiful 5-braided challah. Put this over here. And when you're ready to go ahead and serve, you can also serve a 3-braided challah as well. I'm Chef Marshall. It's been my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, promoting challah in the desert with the Jewish Community Center of Greater Buffalo. I want to again have a shout out to Katie and to Patricia and Avital for having me this afternoon. And I'm more than happy to go ahead and answer questions at this time.
Well, thank you so much, Chef Marshall. Stan, you have more questions for us? Yeah.
So when it's done, you should break off the challah and see how wonderfully soft it is, just like that. And it's delicious.
And really quickly, you got a few more questions here. So at what point can you refrigerate overnight to the next day?
I like to go ahead and tell people, if you're going to refrigerate your dough, the best way to refrigerate it is to go ahead and make your long ropes. Put them on a sheet tray with some parchment paper, put some saran wrap over the top of them, and then go ahead and let them stay in the refrigerator overnight. The thing about that is 2 things. It's good because if you don't have enough time to make the challah all at once, you're able to go ahead and prep it in advance, and it'll be fantastic the next day. The second of that is we know it helps. It still rises, but the refrigeration process actually slows it down until you're ready to be able to do so the next day.
So does the covering the dough when it rises, does that have any effect on it rising?
Well, what that does is it incorporates like temperature. Again, at the very beginning, I talked about how yeast is a pathogen, a bacteria, and it feeds on 3 things: time, temperature, and moisture. And so by covering the dough, we're actually creating a steaming like cabinet,
so
if you will.
Something you would do.
Yes, I definitely would do it. Again, I was showing you the quick way to do it if you don't have enough time to be able to have the time to have it rise.
And Heidi sends her regards and would like to know, when is the next baking lesson?
Well, stay tuned. And thank you very much for your viewing.
I have to say, this was a really tight production team as well. Kudos to you both over there. The
special thanks
and the
to
questions. Nicely done.
Yeah, very special. Very, very special thank you to my son, Sam Goldstein, who is my production crew and helps me quite often in the kitchen. We come up with some crazy ideas and crazy recipes.
I get to enjoy the challah of our labors.
Yes.
I know. Payment for you. I feel the thing that we're missing out the most with doing it virtually are the samples and the delicious smells that I'm sure I would have gotten to have if we were in person. So it's probably
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes. So
the other thing I was thinking that's so wonderful too, though, is now everybody that watched or people that missed, they're able to, use this YouTube link that we sent around, and anytime they want to try the recipe and make the challah, they can click on the link and be cooking right along with you. So they won't have to be making the challah alone. It'll be nice.
Absolutely. And if they wanted to, they can get in touch with me via email. My email is jodmarsh@bex.net. So it's jodemarsh@bex.net.
Perfect.
I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you again. And I just want to again thank Avital and the Partnership Together program from the Western Galilee for connecting us. Definitely a silver lining at this time has been just the connections that we've been made and reaching beyond the Buffalo community. So it's amazing the relationships that we're building, and hopefully maybe we'll have you back in Buffalo again, either virtually or in person sometime. And I look forward to more programs. And also thank you to the Buffalo Jewish Federation, because they're actually the true connection to the Western Galilee Partnership Together program, who put us in touch with Avital. So I'm looking forward to many more programs with everyone. And in closing, the festival is still running through August 21st. There's still a few films to view. Tickets are on sale. We have one final Tuesday talk back next week, Tuesday, on The Spy Behind Home Plate. So if anyone's still interested and needs to get tickets, feel free to check out our website, www.bijff.com, and enjoy your challah. If you could send me pictures, if anybody does do the recipe or did it along today, you can feel free to email me pictures and we can send them along. My email is kwzontek@jccbuffalo.org. And we'd love your feedback and pictures. So thank you so much. Chef Marshall,
Absolutely.
anything in closing?
There was one extra question about if somebody refrigerates or freezes the dough, how long they should let it sit out, I believe, before they use it. The dough needs to be pliable. We really want to be able to roll it out so that it's soft. If it's too cold, basically it's going to be very hard to work with, and you'll have a much more time putting the ropes together and having the dough actually blend the way you want it to. This has been amazing. I just want to thank you again for the honor of being able to be here today. And from my kitchen, from my family to everyone else, good health, and everyone be safe. And soon enough, we'll be all together again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Ours as well. Take care, everyone.
Absolutely. You too.